Great. So thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about how chatbots can assist or replace forms for citizens utilizing government services. Now, these webinars are all oriented towards the public sector, but they apply to the private sector as well. Large organizations, institutions, anything of that nature can definitely learn and find some strategies, tactics out of these webinars. So I feel like it's relevant to all, but we are going to focus mostly on the public sector in our examples and through the slides. So let's get started going forward. So normally I introduce myself first, but with my introduction, I'm actually going to tell a story. So first, what I'm going to do is introduce who TARS is. So we are help state and local government agencies scale services and customer support for their citizens using chatbots. And we do this in all kinds of capacities. We work with state agencies, a lot of Secretary of State, actually, as well as cities in the United States, doing basically exactly what that intro said there. So if you are a part of those organizations, the public sector side of TARS is focused on helping scale services and customer support for you. I am Levi. I'm a consultant here at TARS. I have been working on chatbots for 4 years now, and most of that has been actually in the public sector. I've also worked on chatbots in the private sector, but most of my main work has been in the public domain. And there I've built some of the largest public-facing chatbot systems in the US government, as well as assisted agencies and cities in deploying their own. And we've actually had some recent deployments doing very well, which is really exciting. And we've actually discussed one of those, which is Missouri Secretary of State. Just has had tremendous success. And recently we're also able to help Tyler, Texas, when the bad weather hit, to help them communicate updates to their citizens better. And and that's one of those things about chatbots. It's a really massive value add to everyone, is the ability to rapidly update and communicate information. So on this note, I'm going to talk about when I was working for the state of Montana. And that position, I'm going to tell a little story about this. That position was remote, and I was in an office, and it was for the DMV, right? So I was in my own little office, in a field office where people would go to get their driver's license or an ID card. And I was responsible for all the forms that anybody touched, whether it was paper or digital. I had designed them or optimized them in some capacity. And to this day, the forms that I have had direct influence on have been interacted with millions of citizens and continue to do so. And I've learned a lot from that experience, specifically through direct feedback from people trying to fill these forms out. It was kind of a nice touch being at the basically ground zero, where folks were filling these forms out, the paper in particular, and complaining about the experience. So I spent untold hours trying to rewrite, restructure, reorganize these forms to make it a better experience. And it taught me a lot about how terrible forms are in the first place, why they're so hard to use, and why citizens, or just anybody, me included, when I run into a form, don't enjoy them. I don't enjoy filling out a form. I'm sure you don't either. Nobody else does. We're a pretty big club here. We can all come around this one issue, I think. So as I was there, the particular form was to basically get your driver's license, right? To renew your license or get a replacement, any of those things, you had to fill out this generic form. But if there was actually, right, conditions to that, there was 3 different forms. And if you fit certain conditions, you had to find the right form and fill it out. And on top of that, there was a lot of confusing elements on the form. No matter how hard I tried to make it better, there was a lot of confusing elements that had to be there. Some by law, others by administrative rules that existed on that. So it made this experience very difficult on my end as somebody who works or worked in that field. It was very difficult to deal with this, right? So we're talking about building PDFs either through Microsoft Word, which is how I started and it was terrible, or Adobe products to be able to design those forms a little more fluidly, and turning those all into PDFs that could be downloaded online as well. So it was kind of this broad arching thing, right? Some of them were paper. Almost all of them had to be printed out and signed and then re-scanned in, which is the absolute worst process you could ever have, even with the digital forms, because no signature could be made digitally per law in Montana when it required, when it came to voter registration. And all driver license forms have to have a way to register to vote. So it became this kind of double-edged sword where it always came down to being a paper form. And while listening to these citizens, at least in some capacity, I was able to reword things like registering to vote to make it more easy for them to understand, because there's a lot of conditions, a lot of things they had to think about, and they almost always came up without that section filled out and said, I don't get this. I don't know how to do this. This doesn't make any sense to me. And eventually we're able to figure that out, write it out in a way that was more easily understood and reduce those complaints and reduce that lack of people filling it out. But there still was a significant amount. And that was just one section, right? The whole form had issues no matter what. So here are the top 3 issues that I discovered whilst going through this process. Citizens often found the experience frustrating, which I think we can all agree that filling out forms, especially complex forms, is frustrating. The form is restricted in space. Now, this can obviously change if it's a digital form, but in this particular case, the form had to be also paper. So I was literally bound by a sheet, like a single side of a piece of paper, or sometimes 2-sided, depending on what it was, which creates a lot of different challenges. The most important one there is that you don't have much room to explain anything. Instructions are very muted. They're very condensed. They have to be super concise. Maybe you get a sentence, maybe a couple sentences throughout the form to explain. And sometimes conditions, especially in government or large organizations that apply, are complex. How do you explain a complex do this, or do this based on these factors in a sentence? It's very tough, right? And people miss those because they have to be very small font and hard to read to fit them on the page, or they read them and they're still confused. So that is a major drawdown of forms in the first place. In digital forms, I hate to say it, but guess what? You may have all the room in the world, but again, people don't read on the internet, right? So when you change the interface from paper, more likely to read in depth, to digital, more likely to scan and pick up key elements and move on. And the key elements are the form fields, right? So they're skipping over your instructions, and I've seen this time and time again, and failing to complete the form accurately or at all, which is even worse. And we'll talk about what the problem that causes just after here in a second. So again, excuse me, the form is confusing. This leads more into that info, right, or that instructions. There's limited space to include instructions to guide the user through how to fill out the form in the first place, especially, and this is so true of government, when there's existing conditions that would qualify you for filling out the form in the first place. Sometimes people go through the whole process of filling out a form only to find out that they didn't qualify for it in the first place. This happens to so many people, and I wish I could tally up the amount of time and money wasted because citizens didn't understand the conditions up front, filled out the form, submitted it, somebody reviewed it, realized they don't fit the conditions through who knows how much back and forth, denied the form, citizen starts over, they're super frustrated and very unhappy. It is a rampant problem in government. I mean, it's bad. It happens all the time. So, and then also that separate service, right, of registering to vote. That was very confusing to people. It's like, I'm here to do one thing, but there's this other thing. By law, it had to be submitted, or sorry, included in the form. But it also causes distraction and confusion and makes it very hard for people to complete the form. So if they can't complete the form, then there's inherently going to be more time spent explaining how to do it. And that, especially for the DMV, is like one of their biggest killers. Why do you wait hours in the DMV? For simple reasons just like this. So it's a massive problem. It's actually very, very serious, and causes a lot of strife overall. And then finally, employees manually entered info. Now, I know this is true for so many different organizations, and it's unfortunate, but the truth is, when those folks filled out that long form with all that information on paper, they handed it to the examiner. And what did the examiner do? Looked at the piece of paper and manually entered every piece of that data into the computer system. And that's it. I mean, they literally just transferred the data from the form to the computer. They do a couple tests with the person, checking their vision and hearing or whatever it may be. And then they take their picture and print out their license. So most of the time is actually them just duplicating the work of manually entering the information the citizen already manually entered. I mean, you can already see the massive inefficiency that's causing here, but this is true across many places. Now, digital forms, not necessarily, they have the option of automating that transfer of data, but I've seen plenty that don't, where they come in, the person looks at it, and they actually still manually enter it in some other system or multiple systems to do different things. So we're not really eliminating this manual data entry with digital forms either. And even worse, even the digital forms for the Montana DMV were scanned and sent in, right? So if there was any data entry that had to be done again, it was again manual because the form was scanned. There was no digital fields to it. And even the digital copies that had to be printed out so they could sign it and then scan back in, guess what? No digital fields, all required manual entry. So not good. So what's really this overarching problem with forms in government services and these organizations? Well, they're confusing, inefficient, inaccessible, which we haven't talked about yet, and they're causing a massive bottleneck between citizens and services. This is the key here, right? Major bottlenecks eliminate your ability to scale. They create massive wait times. They create massive hemorrhage of dollars, right? Money going out the window that could easily be resolved. And we're going to actually talk about how that looks. But first, let's explore this problem a little more in depth. Sorry about that. That slide wasn't supposed to be there. But anyways, forms range between simple and complex, right? So let's just focus on the forms up front first. So simple is minimal fields, minimal instructions, and may require more work for the employee on the side to resolve if they have to gather more information, right? So this is more for private sector, but you have a simple form up just to get people to fill it out with a low barrier to entry, and make it easier for them. But then you have to follow up and get a lot more information from them because that form didn't actually do what you needed it to do, which is it was a very top of the funnel. Here's just a few bits of information, my name, my email, my phone number, and now I have to re-engage and figure out a way to get the additional information. So a lot more entries, a lot less, a lot more entries, a lot more work potentially required to get the necessary info you need. Complex is obviously lots of fields, lots of conditions and complexity behind just the forms, and also less work for your team to get additional information, right? That's the whole point of the form. It's very focused. It's grabbing in a ton of information, so you have it all at your fingertips when it comes in. So that's kind of how that DMV process worked. Is the form was a full page. It took a lot of different information, and there's definitely more complex forms out there than that, but still they had everything they needed, and they really didn't have to ask the person anything, right? They just looked at the form, manually entered it into the computer, and then had a few questions for tests. Versus if the user filled out just their name and email, and then the examiner had to talk to them to find out all the rest, you could see how that would be a pretty long process, a lot of work back and forth between the conversation, things getting lost in in translation, I guess, so to speak, between the two people. So let's look at simple a little bit more. So simple increases in attempts. I'll just put it that way. It increases attempts. It doesn't necessarily increase completion rates. Well, it does, but it increases the amount of attempts people make at it, right? So you're going to get more entries for sure, because it's a lower barrier to entry. They usually have minimal instruction. So they're simple. They don't need a lot of instruction. One sentence or less, should not have a lot of conditions behind it as well. It's simple. But again, the employees may need to obtain additional information. If they don't, then this is kind of more of a sweet spot for the employee, right? If they even have to manually enter the data, there's not that much. So that does save them significant time over a complex form, but it just really depends on the situation. And then complexity, of course, a lot less people are actually going to successfully complete complex forms. That's really, I mean, just getting down to the bottom line. If complex forms are the way they have to interact with services, your call centers are going to take a spike because of that. They're going to get more calls. Your employees are going to have to deal with more people in general to solve or help them through those forms, because they're complex, they're hard to figure out. And if they make a mistake, traditionally, when somebody makes a mistake, it's like, tough, go refill it out, do it again, especially if you've scanned and sent, right? You're going to have to refill out that form. It's a major pain point for citizens, and it's causing a lot of frustration, a lot of wasted time, and we do need to consider their time too. I think this is a problem a lot of people don't look at, is especially in government, the citizens' time matters. It's not just free. It's free maybe for the government side, but it's not free for them, and they don't really appreciate having their time wasted. So something to always keep forefront: don't waste people's time ever. Additionally, there's going to be a lot of conditions and selections. That just means a lot of different options for them to select. There may be if this, do that, if that, do this, scenarios on those complex forms. This is where you lose a lot of people. This is where those inaccuracies happen. They check the wrong box. They get confused about what's going on. And this honestly can even happen on simple forms. Just depending on if you bring conditions to the form, you're going to have issues every time. It's really hard to explain in static text how to do different things. And this is true even in, help articles. It's hard to list out steps and have somebody follow it properly, especially if you introduce jump to this step if this applies, but do this step if it doesn't, right? That's very confusing to people. So finally, if they're manually entering this data, it's a ton of work for the employee to take a complex long form and translate it into other systems. So not a great experience really for anybody, employee or citizen. So what I've done is I've actually come up with 3 tactics to help solve this problem. And you can imagine they all include chatbots. And what we're going to do is talk through these really quick. I have some demos pulled up of actual deployments, and an actual deployment and another one that's a theoretical deployment, but you can kind of see the difference between the form that's offered and how the chatbot would handle that experience as well. We can talk through that, and then we'll be done and ready for questions. So this first tactic is stepping citizens through the process before they even get to the form or they start the process of requesting information or services. So what this does is it's kind of like onboarding, right? We onboard people to software and other experiences all the time, but we often don't onboard people for the process of filling out a form or going through a service, right, which includes filling out that form. The form is usually front and center of the actual part where the citizen has to take their time and engage in providing something. So one of the key things with this, right, is where forms struggle to give proper instructions or guide somebody through the process, chatbots absolutely excel. And the reason is because they can take the whole experience step by step, requiring the user to input or accept to move forward, kind of like a wizard, very much like a wizard experience, right? Where they can only do the one thing, or they're reading the one thing that's happening that step, and then they click to move to the next one, right? So it's very controlled, and the user chooses when they move forward. So that's key. They are driving the experience. They're not being driven by it, essentially. The form makes you drive down how it's structured, not the other way around. So the chatbot can help them go through that process. Very important, branching users based on conditions. So if a service, which almost all services have certain conditions that make different things apply to them, the chatbot can branch and give that context to that service and ask the user a question. Which of these applies to you? And when they select it, now you can give them custom messaging and you can deliver them to custom outcomes, which is really important for them understanding how it applies to them specifically. And of course, this is kind of already talked about this, but this communicates the full process to the citizens. So they understand from start to finish what it's going to look like and what they need to do to make it successful. Very key. This is often left out, or it's buried in a whole bunch of text, right, that nobody's reading anyways. So you have to make that text much more engaging and upfront with the citizen, and that will allow them to complete the full process, including filling out forms, if that's the case. Much higher completion rate for sure. Now, assisting citizens with filling out the form directly. Now, this is really interesting. This is a really interesting case here where you can actually use the chatbot to interact with the form. And how we do this is simple. Excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice here a little bit, but it's similar to how we do conversational websites. If you haven't heard about that, we have some information out there. But basically, when somebody interacts with a website or a form, an element on a website, the chatbot can launch from a curated position and start chatting with the user based on that intent, right? So if there's a info icon at a certain point in your form that somebody clicks, normally they hover over it, say, and a little modal box pops up, a little hover box pops up and has some static text that tries to explain something to them. Well, with a chatbot, you can have that on screen with your form, with that digital form. And when they click that icon, instead, the chatbot can open up and explain that specific step to the user and guide them through it, which is a much better experience than trying to put static text in there. It's also very relevant to the user. So when they click on that particular info, it's to that particular info and helps them through it. So you can have multiple info boxes, each one going to a very specific messaging and outcome system. And then you can also ask the user questions to determine their conditions through that, right? So that may be at the very beginning of the form, As the form starts, the chatbot pops up and says, hey, before you fill this out, I have a few questions to ask you to make sure that you are qualified for this service in the first place. And that is a much better experience than saying, if you have been born before this date, and if this condition applies and that, and I've seen so many forms that way. It's so confusing for people. The chatbot could say, when were you born? This date. Oh, sorry, you're not qualified for this service yet. You need to be this old, right? So totally different experience, saving them tons of time. And they're going to be like, hey, all right, I appreciate that. I appreciate that I didn't have to fill this thing out and then find out that I wasn't qualified. So very, really a really nice way of qualifying people, just asking questions up front. And then finally, replacing forms altogether with chatbots. Now, to precursor this, very important that the services are pretty simple, or you're just updating info, right? So chatbots aren't really going to be doing a long form type interaction with folks, because that's a lot of work. I mean, no matter what, right? Long form, long interaction with a chatbot, it still takes a lot of time. So I'm not sure there's much of a difference in that experience overall, except for you can explain things a little bit better. With long forms, I would actually much rather have a chatbot explaining the certain steps and qualifying the people at certain places throughout it than using the chatbot to completely collect all of that information, because that's a lot. And sometimes fields are faster to just burn in information. So I totally understand that. But when it comes to simple services and updates, chatbots are way better than forms. For one, they have they can guide that user while they're submitting their info. So kind of like what we were trying to create on that second tactic, but now part of the experience, right? So much better. They can go around information that they don't need to fill out if certain conditions apply, which makes the experience faster and more seamless for the citizen, which I think is really important. Why fill out unnecessary information? Nobody should ever have to, ever. It makes no sense. Wastes everybody's time. So chatbots can actually custom tailor that experience, that information collection based on the user themselves and if it's relevant or not. And checking the conditions, we talked about this a little bit before, also very true with a chatbot only experience or chatbot first experience, is they are definitely going to check the conditions to make sure the user is qualified in the first place. Much better experience. I don't know how else to say it other than that. When you're asked questions that you just have to respond to simply, and then it tells you if you're qualified or not, is much better than trying to read a list of qualifications and exemptions and conditions. Lots of people are going to skip that. And then really key here, right? Let's eliminate that manual data entry. Let's automate the back-end data transfer. So with chatbots, it's very easy to take that information and submit it right to your database or any number of applications you use. As long as they have an API, we can trigger it and send that info right to where it needs to go. This is massive for employees, massive, right? It's just massive time savings. Nobody wants to manually enter data, and they shouldn't have to. So with chatbots, we can automate that process, make it much easier, and overall a better experience. So ultimately, the key to information gathering is to keep it relevant, accessible, and streamlined. And we hadn't talked about the accessibility part, but basically, I'll probably pull up a form here. I'm going to jump over to some examples. And what I can do is show you a PDF form and what it looks like on mobile. I think everybody knows what it looks like on mobile, but let's just say it's not accessible, right? So from a device standpoint, most government forms or organizational forms that use PDFs are not mobile accessible. 50% or more of your people interacting with your digital services cannot deal with a PDF on their phone. They just absolutely cannot do it. They can barely read it. They can't fill it out. It's a terrible experience. So you're not mobile friendly. You're not mobile optimized if you're using PDFs for forms ever. It just doesn't work. Not to mention that a lot of people don't actually fill out the PDFs correctly to be screen reader compatible. So they're actually in violation of accessibility guidelines. And agencies get sued all the time because of this simple one, not adding alt text to form fields to explain the form field through a screen reader. Big deal. Not making sure, not organizing your tabs, so as you tab through it, tabs in relation to the information that the user has to submit. Most don't do this. Major no-no. So there's many things to consider when talking about PDFs that just go beyond the scope. Most people don't even think about the mobile inaccessibility, but they definitely miss the real accessibility issues with screen readers and whatnot. So what I have here is a chatbot that does that pre-life cycle, right? So they haven't filled out a form, but they're going to learn what the process is, and it's going to discuss some conditions with them and move them through getting, say, renewing their license, right? So this is a chatbot that's out there for the Montana DMV that helps people get ready for a service that they may have to go in to an exam station to get their license. So I'm just going to drive through this really quick. As you can see, it's much more service oriented, right? I need a standard license service. So I click on that and it's like, okay, very straightforward. Here's all the things you can do. I'm looking to renew my license. You can see how easy this is to drive. Now here's a condition. It's really important. You cannot renew your license if you're outside of 6 months from expiration or past 3 months of your expiration date. This is a condition. Most people do not see this on the website. They totally miss it. A chatbot makes it much more clear for them, also using rich text to bold it, so they're actually reading it. It's very important. But better yet, this could actually just say, enter the expiration date of your license, and then determining if they are within that 6 months or outside of that 3 months after, and then making it a decision based on that. But as you can see here, it's more user driven on this side, so they have to do a little bit more. But they have these conditions, and these conditions drive them to different outcomes of what they need to do if they can't find their license. If their license was expired 3 or more beyond 3 months, it will tell them what they need to do and take them through a whole different process. This is key. I mean, it seems simple, seems straightforward, but this will help. This does help many people avoid a whole lot of wasted time and drive to the correct outcomes that they're looking for. So what I can do is actually show you a form really quick that's on here. I mean, I know they probably haven't changed since I left, or not much, so pretty confident that you're going to still see PDFs, and no matter how well I tried to put those together, they're still very complicated. So we'll just jump over here really quick. There's all these forms, right? And there's manuals and things you can grab. Let's see. But this is basically the digital version of the form that people are filling out when they come to the exam station. But this is for I think maybe mail-in, or no, it's just an application. So it's the same thing. It's exactly what they're filling out. So online, we have, the ability to digitally fill this out, but they still have to print it to sign it. This is the law. So let's go over here really quick and inspect this. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Well, whatever. It's not important. Basically, if we brought this down to a mobile view, we'd have to pinch to zoom to read anything, right? We couldn't fill out the fields. They'd be so tiny, couldn't read them, couldn't fill them out. Really hard to interact with. If you use PDFs, you know this. It's not good. So let's go to the second tactic, right? So let's go to, what if you have a form, a digital form like this, pretty straightforward, but you also have a chat bot assisting with that form. So here, this is the Bozeman report a pothole, and we actually built this chatbot. It's a demo. It's not an actual live deployment, just to clarify up front for everybody. And they have this simple form for reporting a pothole. The problem that comes with this is I don't know street names. Like I very rarely know. Oh, there was some PII there. I just revealed my home address, but I rarely know the street name, and it might be a cross section, or maybe it's not really even on like a cross section. It's really hard to determine where that actual pothole is. So I submit this. They spend manual time reviewing it and sending crews out to try and find where that is. It's very tough, not a good process. Or there could be a chatbot. So when I was talking about having those info buttons, including in this portion here, like looking up by street name, clicking a button, chatbot pops up and says, let's select it on a map and make this much easier for you. Instead of trying to tell me the street name, pin it on a map to let me know. So this is finding me out in the middle of nowhere, which is where I'm at. But basically you get the idea, right? So I can take this pin and I can say, this isn't really a road, but say, here's that road. And that's exactly where I had that experience. I could zoom in. It's by that Applebee's, and I hit it right there and use that. I don't know why it's saying I'm in Tennessee, but it is. Hey, it happens. It's Google. And go through this whole process, right? One thing they don't have is the ability to upload a photo so they can see exactly where it is and find that pothole and resolve that issue. So a much better experience. And this could actually totally replace this form. I think it really is a much better experience. You can see how it gets a much more multimodal, right? So we have a map, we have a way of pinning things. We can submit a photo. So if I was walking down the street and wanted to report this issue, I could literally just hit yes. It would pull up the camera on my phone. I'd take the picture, submit it, and be done with the process, which is much, much nicer than trying to fill out a vague form. This is going to cause them, I'm sure it caused them a lot of time it's a simple form, but right, they have to do a lot of extra work on the back end to actually resolve the issue in the first place. So you can collect more details. This is kind of what's going on here. Similarly, and then service request is complete. It's ticketed, right? And then it asks, so now there's a ticket. There's actually some accountability and measurability to this. And then it asks if you'd like to receive updates. So you could then, as a citizen, fill in your information and receive updates through email or text about that situation being resolved or not. A much better experience all across the board, 100%, compared to filling out a very generic form and then never knowing if they even got it or did anything about it in the first place. So that is pretty much it. That's our webinar for now, for today. If you have any questions, feel free to type them up now. I'm going to assume everybody is frantically typing their questions for me, and I will be happy to answer them. If you want to see more about the chatbot or have any questions about how chatbots could work with forms or replace them, feel free. Anything you would like. And in the meantime, here is a way to contact us if you're interested in learning more about chatbots in government or just large organizations in general. Feel free to reach out for this number, email me, or visit our website. There's lots of different use cases there. And ever since TARS was in its infancy, the goal was to replace forms. So this webinar was really diving into the purpose of TARS, why TARS came to be in the very first place, which is to get rid of those boring, unengaging forms that are really just costing tons of time and money. We don't need that. Let's get rid of them. So I'll just wait a little bit longer, see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap this webinar up. Did it within 40 minutes, so that's not too bad. I said it would be a quick one today, and I meant it. So I don't see any questions coming in. So if that's the case, then I am going to wrap this up. Just, oh, there's some questions right before. Right at the finish line. Is there a mechanism in the chatbot to correct an error in the chatbot? That's an interesting question. I guess I'm trying to understand this a little bit. Can you expound on that a little bit, Jeffrey? Are you saying like if the chatbot makes a mistake, is there some type of mechanism to remedy that mistake? Or if the user makes an error, is there a remedy for that error? Um, you could just clarify in the chat if you'd like. But if it's a user side, right? If the user enters something that's incorrect, there's already pre-canned messages that say, depending on some validations, right? Like we need an actual email address from you, or you need to enter your full name, or things of that nature. Additionally, if we got more complex, users can, like, say, submit that ticket number, that reference number, and we can check it against the database. And if it exists, then we can give them the status of that. If it doesn't exist, then that would basically be an error, right? And we can, using conditions, jump them to an error message that says, sorry, this request does not exist. Or we could not find it. Would you like to resubmit it, or contact us to report this issue? So there's definitely different ways. Yeah, so there's definitely different ways that it can move throughout that. But if a user makes an error, there's already pre-canned ways to validate and fix that. And you can also redisplay the information the user submitted and get them to confirm, right? Like, are you sure this is your phone number? Are you sure this is your email? Yes, or no, I need to update that. I made a mistake. So many different ways to approach it. Ultimately, there was no reason that a user should enter an error in information. They should be able to review it and fix it if they need to, and it's not hard to do. Okay, so next question. Do you think people would find it easier to fill out forms if it requires a lot of information, asking them to upload documents? It really depends. I think really long forms, it's hard to say that chatbots beat that experience, at least in this capacity, right? In a boxed chatbot. If, say, we unboxed the chatbot and it lived across a screen and was more dynamic that way, then I think we could be talking about replacing long forms. That's not where we're at today. So as far as long forms go, the only time I would bring a chatbot into that experience is if there's a ton of conditions and it's really confusing. And the chatbot, then it's worth having the chatbot guide the folks through it and making it a 20-minute process, because it's a 20-minute process or longer to fill out the form anyways. Let's bring the chatbot in, help them upload documents digitally right through the chatbot, and deal with all of those particular services while making sure the folks stay on track and get to a successful completion, because that's the key, right? Complex forms, low completion rate. Many people fall off and don't finish, so we want to get them to a completion rate. Chatbots help with that. So it's a trade-off. If you feel like it's very complex and hard to deal with, that is the time to bring in a chatbot, define those conditions, ask the questions, and create a better experience for the users that will make them want to stay and fill it out too. So that's another key element to this, right? If that experience with the chatbot, even though it takes longer, and you would want to cue them and say, this takes about 20 minutes through our discussion to complete this, this service, so they know, but they're going to enjoy that experience way more than trying to figure it out on a form. Okay. Thank you for the questions. Great. Really enjoyed having some audience participation there and asking these great questions. I don't think we have any more. Yep, I don't think we have any more. So again, thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. I always enjoy these webinars. Reach out to us if you have any other questions. Until next time, I'm Levi, your conversational consultant, and this was a TARS webinar. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.